Welcome everyone. My name is Samantha Oakley from ALA's Public Programs Office. I'm pleased to introduce today's webinar, Read, Discuss, Meet, and Act, the Power of Words, the program series that won ALA's 2017 Excellence in Library Programming Award. Before we start, I'd like to make a few quick announcements. Today's webinar is presented by ALA's Public Programs Office with support from ALA's Cultural Communities Fund. To learn more about the Cultural Communities Fund or make a contribution, visit ala.org/ccf. Hopefully, many of you are familiar with Programming Librarian, a website of ALA's Public Programs Office. We have a lot of program ideas and an online learning library full of free webinars just like this one. Finally, a couple of notes about our virtual classroom. Only our presenter has microphone access, but you are welcome to type your questions or comments in the chat box. We will have time for a Q&A at the end. Also, if you have any technical issues, please send a private message to Colleen, also known as PPO Admin. To do so, hover over PPO Admin in the upper right-hand corner of your screen and click Start Private Chat. Now, I'd like to introduce our presenter, Michael Hoerger. Michael is the Communications and Marketing Manager at Monroe County Public Library, where he sets the foundation and leads the creation and delivery of the library's comprehensive communications and marketing strategy. He has worked in marketing and graphic design for nonprofits for more than 15 years. Prior to joining Monroe County Public Library, Michael managed online communications for the independent news program Democracy Now! With that, I would like to turn things over to Michael.
Thank you, Samantha. And welcome everyone. Wanted to start today, just give you an overview of what to expect as we go through the presentation today and discuss our award-winning program, Read, Discuss, Meet, and Act. We'll start, I'll give you a little overview of our community and our library, just so you know where this program happened and in the context that we did this program at. I'd then like to review a little bit with working with our Friends of the Library organization, who were big partners with us in doing this program, and the Power of Words program in general, which is a biannual series where we bring an author to our community. So I'll give a little background on that, and then I'll get sort of into the actual program with John Lewis, so how we decided upon John Lewis and how we were able to convince John Lewis and his co-authors of March to come to our community. Then I'll go over sort of how we got community partners to the table. We had a lot of partners in the community that were really a big part of organizing the program. And then I'll sort of go through the different elements of reading the books, discussing the books, meeting the authors, and act, define those. After that, I'll give a review of how our library and the work our library and library staff had to do to support this large program, from building a comprehensive website to sort of how the different departments in our library became involved and what work they did. And then I'll go on and give a pretty in-depth discussion of how we supported the community-wide read, all the programs that we did over the month before John Lewis's visit, go over how we hosted John Lewis and what that took and how that evening went. Finally, a little on the ACT part, where how we encourage the community to take action based on what they learned with John Lewis. Review some of our outcomes and the evaluations we did for our program. And then I'll finish with just a little discussion of what went into putting together the application for an award-winning program. And as Samantha mentioned, we've offered that resource to download to the left, which you can do at any time. So with that overview done, let me get started. So first off, I'm with Monroe County Public Library. We're in the state of Indiana, which you can see here on the map. Monroe County is about 140,000 residents, which we serve. And the main city in Monroe County is Bloomington, Indiana, and Bloomington has about 84,000 residents. The main thing that Bloomington is known for is being the home of Indiana University. And I should point out, as it'll be relevant later, about half of the population of Bloomington are students at Indiana University. So out of 84,000 people, a little over 40,000 are students So it does make for a unique demographic in our town. In addition, we do have a large, because of the university, we do have a large international population. But also being a county in southern Indiana, outside of Bloomington, we do have a large rural population, which our library also serves, and which we did make a lot of effort to reach with our Power of Words program. A little bit about Monroe County Public Library. We have an operating budget of a little over $8 million a year, about 170 employees, 125 of which are full-time. And we have about 400 or a little over 2 million items in our physical collection and 400,000 items in our digital collection. Just give you a little background of the size and scope of what we offer, and sort of for comparison to your libraries. And finally, I just wanted to touch, we have a very close working relationship with our Friends organization. They raise a little over $100,000 a year to support library programming and other efforts. We work very closely with them throughout the year, interacting with them on their annual campaign and membership drives. We actually house a Friends of the Library bookstore here in our main library building, where they sell weeded books from our collections and donations for the community to raise funds for our library. And we also do programming with them, which the Power of Words is one of the biggest that we do, but we do other local coffee talks and book talks to help get people to join the Friends and support the library. So a little background on the Power of Words, changing our world one author at a time. This is a biannual author event presented by our library and the Friends. The program's mission is to host an author writing on important topics of our time, and more specifically, topics that speak to the average citizen's ability to positively change the world in which we live. This program started in 2007 with a visit by nationally acclaimed novelist, poet, and storyteller Luis Alberto Urrea. Following that first evening, we decided to make it a biannual event, and we hosted Rick Bragg in 2009, James McBride in 2011, before he won many of his awards that he's gone on to win, so that was exciting to have him a little earlier in his career. And Nicole Moniz was our previous author before John Lewis, and she came in 2013. And really with each program in the Power of Words, it's become larger and more successful than the last. In addition, we have every year, kind of during this time period, also had a One Book, One Community program that we've called One Book, One Bloomington. I'm sure many of you have this in your community or are familiar with the concept where the community is everyone in the community is invited to read the same book and join book discussions on that. And I mention that because as we were coming into 2015, we had kind of come to the idea that we should combine the Power of Words and our One Book, One Bloomington program so that everyone reading the same book could sort of coalesce and come together with them meeting the author of that book. So we knew that as we began planning the very early stages for our 2015 program that we wanted to connect it with our community-wide read. And the other reason we wanted to do an extra big event in 2015, it was also the 50th anniversary of our Friends of the Library group. So we were going to be planning an entire year of events around our Friends group. And I kind of brought in this slide because I really like the little logo treatment we did of adding the birthday cake to our normal Friends of the Library group. We called it Best Friends Forever. And the Power of Words was the very large event that brought together the year-long celebration. So as we, at the end of 2013, began thinking, what are we going to do for the 50th anniversary and to make the Power of Words a much larger program and include One Book, One Bloomington, so we started identifying topics and authors that we thought would resonate with Monroe County residents. Coincidentally, earlier that year, Congressman Lewis had announced the publication of his graphic novel March at the American Library Association's National Conference in Chicago. With Chicago being so close to us, several library staff members attended the conference, and they came back in awe of the Congressman's story and commitment to the importance of libraries, democracy, and community. But how would a small city in Indiana be able to attract a civil rights legend? Well, as it turns out, one of March's co-creators, the graphic novelist Nate Powell, lives and works in Bloomington. And I should say here also, Nate Powell happens to be one of my close and dearest friends. So of course we had an extra close connection to one of John Lewis's authors. And after some discussions with Nate, he agreed that he would work with the library to bring Congressman Lewis to Monroe County. And it seemed, bringing him, that the power of words, changing our world one author at a time, was the perfect match. And so, despite me having a personal relationship with Nate Powell and Nate being a co-author of John Lewis's, it still took a lot of effort and proposals and constant communication to convince Congressman Lewis, his co-authors, and the publicists of the book to come to our town. Of course, the Congressman is very busy with his day job, so he can only do so many book events a year, and they, of course, wanted to hear what we would be doing in our community to make this event worthwhile for the Congressman and to make sure he had a great audience for his message. So we worked very hard to put together a proposal, and so we started that by reaching out to our community to get an idea of who would want to be involved with such an event, and our suspicions that people would be excited about it were quickly confirmed. Reactions by community partners to the possibility of a Lewis visit were joyous and emphatic, and it became quite clear from the onset that this power of words would have to be much bigger than just our library, that everyone in the community had a stake in the importance of civil rights and the legend of John Lewis. So we knew it was going to take a community. So after several months of discussions with the Congressman's office and the publicist and putting forth proposals, we finally got an agreement from them that they would in fact come. So with this yes in hand, the library and the Friends began bringing community groups to the table. And what started as a modest proposal to bring a celebrated civil rights legend to our community for a single evening quickly became a rallying point for a full month of programming, community events, a community-wide read, and a potential flashpoint for important dialogue on race and democracy in America. And at the same time, our library was going through a transformation of providing our librarians the time and opportunities to become more community engaged. We were going through an internal process of turning our librarians out towards the community and having them less on the reference desk and more out in the community. And so this proved the perfect opportunity to begin to do that. So we started by putting together our community partner goals, which you can see here on the slide. And so we began immediately by identifying and reaching out to organizations that were invested in issues of race, diversity, and civil rights. One of our earliest partners was the Indiana University Neil Marshall Black Culture Center. Our local city of Bloomington government, several of their commissions became involved right away. The Human Rights Commission and their Commission on the Status of Black Males, and other IU departments, including the Office of the Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Multicultural Affairs, all became obvious great partners and people that wanted to be involved from the beginning. As I mentioned earlier, about half of our population here in the city of Bloomington are students. And so what we kind of call town and gown issue is always at the forefront for the library and many issues in our community. And we knew we wanted to cross that divide with this program. And crossing that divide between IU and the surrounding community, always a challenge. The library and the Friends knew that successfully bridging this gap was a critical element of the success for our Power of Words program, and that both populations would benefit as a result. Traditionally, the library has reached out to university departments to establish partnerships, but we wanted to reach young people directly, so their involvement was sought out from the beginning. This approach paid off when the library reached out to the Union Board, which is the student-run body that represents the student interests at Indiana University. and by unanimous vote, the Union Board approved full funding and participation with our Power of Words program and secured the IU auditorium for the event, making themselves an indispensable partner throughout the project. Many other IU departments became involved along the way, but having the student body at the decision-making table was perhaps the biggest factor in us successfully crossing that town and gown divide. Civic engagement became another community partner goal. The Center on Congress at Indiana University became an indispensable partner. Other parts of our city government, the mayor's office, the Department of Community and Family Resources got involved. And a local civic leaders living and learning center also became great partners. And finally, as we do with all library programs and services, we wanted to find ways to reach underserved populations in our community. In addition to Indiana University, we have Ivy Tech Community College. They quickly came on board. And both our local school systems, the one for the city of Bloomington and the next town over in the county, both became great partners, and we worked with them to provide them free copies of March to use in the classrooms, and classes from grades 6 through grades 12, many classes made March part of their curriculum that fall. And finally, a local organization, the South Central Community Action Program, which works to involve rural parts of our county, became a tremendous partner and in fact provided free busing from far out in the county to Indiana University for this program, which proved really indispensable because often people that are not involved with the university in our county find it intimidating or difficult to get on campus, whether it is the fact that they don't know where to park or they feel unwelcome there. So to have this organization provide that transportation and that outreach was terrific. So now I just wanted to quickly define the parameters of read, discuss, meet, and act. As the Community Steering Committee came together to plan the event, these were the organizing principles for the project we came up with. I should state that we did not invent the concept of read, discuss, meet, and act. Unfortunately, I'm not 100% certain what library may have come up with it first. Someone came back from ALA one year having just remembered from a presentation or a table this concept. And so we sort of stuck with us for years, and this finally manifested that this was the perfect program to use that concept. So for READ, the community was invited to discover the phenomenal graphic novel March by John Lewis, Andrew Aydin, and Nate Powell. So we made the books available at the library and local bookstores, like I said, in the schools. We held book discussions. We provided resources for local groups to hold their own book discussions. So I'll go over that a bit more, but we did everything we could to support a community-wide reading of the book. And then we invited the community to discuss the books. Everyone was invited to join community conversations through book discussions, wisdom circles, civil rights film series, art talks and exhibits, and much more. A little down the line here, I'll go over all the programs and what we did, including a thorough description of the wisdom circles. And finally, after reading the books and discussing the books, the community was invited to meet John Lewis, Andrew Aydin, and Nate Powell. The entire community was invited to get free tickets for this event, which was held at the IU auditorium. And finally, ACT. We invited people to visit the event website for more information about the events and programs, as well as more information on the authors, the books, and the civil rights movement and graphic novels. We knew everyone would be inspired by the themes and the story, and so we wanted to ensure that with this excitement and with this new knowledge that they had access to information on further things to do and ways to enrich themselves and get involved in the community. And so read, discuss, meet, and act, very large endeavor. So now I'd like to go over the ways that our library and our library staff work to support such a large endeavor. So we started by building a freestanding comprehensive website. As the scope of partners, programs, opportunities, and potential of this historic visit grew, The committee quickly realized that a simple announcement would not suffice. Thousands in our community wanted to learn more, wanted to read more, and wanted to do more. So work began in earnest on creating a comprehensive website built around the power of words organizing principles: read, discuss, meet, and act. The website supported community members looking to read the books by providing complete information on March, including where to find copies of the books, biographies of the authors, and teaching resources. Members of the community were invited to join the conversation and explore the themes in the book through community events, book discussions, films, classes, and more. And all the various programs throughout the community were featured on an interactive calendar on the website. The website provided extensive information about the authors, biographies, recommended websites and videos, and how to get free tickets and parking information for the main event. From the beginning, we knew this was no ordinary event. People would be moved to do something by what they saw and heard. The ACT section of the website helped community members find opportunities to act by providing information on further reading, viewing, and getting involved. Lists of recommended music, movies, and books were put together by our librarians and leaders in the community, as well as resources for teachers, school librarians, and parents to facilitate conversations on civil rights. The Center on Congress at Indiana University's Freedom Summer app, an interactive module based on the civil rights movement, was also provided for free through the website. And we even got our local NPR and PBS affiliates, WFIU and WTIU, involved in providing free access to archives of audio and video related to John Lewis and the civil rights movement. And of course, this large program and this endeavor took work across the library. As the Community Steering Committee focused on planning the community-wide events, the library focused on how to support this large endeavor. Just as the whole community had a stake in this historic visit, so did every department in our library. Our Community Engagement and Learning Services Unit, which is where our librarians are all sort of based. So our librarians representing audiences from children through teens and adults, they all immediately got to work planning library programs, creating book lists and support materials, building displays, and working with partners to get copies of March into the schools and into the community. You can see pictured here was a display our children's librarians put together to help younger audiences get introduced and interact with the powerful topics that are introduced in John Lewis's books. Our Access and Content Services Department, knowing the demand for March, John Lewis's earlier biography, Walking with the Wind, and other civil rights material, not to mention interest in graphic novels in general, would increase, our librarian selectors got busy identifying and purchasing new materials for the collection well in advance of our Power of Words programming series. In addition, our customer service staff, our frontline staff, were as excited as anyone about John Lewis's visit, and they helped increase community excitement via word-of-mouth marketing, and helping library customers find related materials and information. A unique element at our library is our local community access and television services, our local cable access channel called Community Access and Television Services is actually part of our library, and their television studio is based right in our main library building. So they're called CATS for short, and they undertook the daunting task of documenting the numerous community programs and discussion surrounding the power of words, in addition to taping and streaming live online the main event with John Lewis. And finally, Communications and Marketing, which is the unit I manage. We stayed busy throughout the entire series creating promotional materials for every single event and creating and maintaining the comprehensive website. So of course, READ, the first and primary element of our program, was all about supporting a community-wide read and reducing anywhere we could barriers to getting the books. So here are some screen grabs from our website. We had 40 copies of each book added to our collection, which went off the shelves quickly and stayed that way pretty much throughout. We kept having to purchase more and more copies of March Book 1 and March Book 2. As I mentioned earlier, our Friends of the Library bookstore is based here in the library, so we sold copies through the bookstore. And even right down the street from our main library is our local comic book store, who made a big window display and had copies of the book available the entire time. We also worked with the publicist of the book to have excerpts from the book available on our website so people could sort of introduce themselves to this new graphic novel format and get an idea of the story. And as I mentioned earlier, we worked with our local schools to get free copies of the books into the classrooms for any teachers that were teaching it there. We also, our library has a project called Book Club Kits, where we get together 8 to 10 copies of a book. They're in a tote bag, and any local book clubs or anyone wanting to hold a book discussion can check out those book club kits. And so we had kits available for both March books that many of our local book clubs checked out. The next part discussed was a month of programs. So after all the planning and partnership building, we finally, with our community partners, presented a month of programming leading up to the main event. So now I'll just give you an overview of what those programs were. You can see them listed to the left, but I'll go through a few slides that show some of the promotional materials. The first was a civil rights film series that we called the Power of Words film series. One of our librarians and one of our senior, what we call senior information assistants, or some other libraries call reference assistants, coordinated and presented films and discussions on the civil rights movement. They successfully reached a broad base of viewers by screening popular and documentary films in our auditorium. The film series kicked off with In the Heat of the Night, which is a film from 1967, about an African-American police detective who was asked to investigate a murder in a racially hostile southern town. We followed that up the next week with Mississippi Burning from 1988. 2 FBI agents with wildly different styles arrive in Mississippi to investigate the disappearance of some civil rights activists. Next, we showed the 2011 documentary Freedom Riders, the story behind a courageous band of civil rights activists who in 1961 challenged segregation in the American South. And we ended the series with a showing of Selma from 2014, chronicle of Martin Luther King's campaign to secure equal voting rights via the epic march from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama in 1965, and in which John Lewis is, of course, a major part of that film and represented by an actor in that. We had a great partnership with the Indiana University Art Museum, where they went through their collection and identified 2 authors with whom they had a lot of materials for, who were active during the civil rights era and whose art challenged and made people think about civil rights issues. And so they were able to pull some of that art out and did an art talk presenting that artwork called Reflections on Race, and the work of Robert Colescott and Thornton Dial. And this talk considered how Colescott and Dial offered unique visual responses to racism, racial stereotypes, and the civil rights movement. Of course, as you can see on the flyer here, we have an ongoing monthly book discussion group that we call Books Plus. So, of course, this monthly book discussion featured the March Books 1 and Book 2. The focus, of course, was on the content and what's behind the book, but a lot of it was also on the format, as many of our Books Plus regulars were new to the graphic novel form, and many, if not all of them, this was their first quote-unquote comic book that they were reading as an adult. Which is a good segue to another wonderful program we did called An Introduction to Comics and the Graphic Novel. John Walsh, an associate professor at the library school at Indiana University and a member of our library's board of trustees, discussed the history, development, and formal features of the comic book and the graphic novel. He did a wonderful hour-long presentation of the history of comic books and the graphic novel format, and how that evolved and advanced and gotten to the point where someone like John Lewis has chosen to tell his story in that format. In addition to the Books Plus book discussion we did for adults, we did have a book discussion geared just for teens. Our teen librarian led a discussion of March Book 1. And as part of that program, we were able to secure funding, and all teens that registered for that book discussion received a free copy of the book ahead of time. We also showed another documentary, The March, which was part of our partnership with our local PBS affiliate. And that documentary is a film, is the story of the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, told by the people who organized and participated in it. And that was a great one because they sort of came up with that sort of in the midst of all the programs happening. They said, hey, we have the rights to this great documentary, we want to show it. So it was great to be flexible and be able to add that and do that. Finally, as I mentioned earlier, Nate Powell lives here in our town, so we made sure to take great advantage of that. We worked with him to secure a bunch of his original artwork from March, and we had The Power of Words and Pictures, Nate Powell's original artwork from March. So this was on display at Indiana University's Neil Marshall Black Cultural Center. It featured original drawings and panels published in March Book 1 and Book 2. But in addition, Nate Powell supplied, In addition, Nate Powell supplied several unpublished and alternate pages from the books, and even the original sort of demo tryout page he created before joining John Lewis to draw the story. And we also invited Nate Powell to do an author talk. So he came to the library, to our library's teen space, and led a discussion about his own artistic process and presented an interactive comics workshop. Now I'd like to describe a unique partnership program that we did with our city of Bloomington called Wisdom Circles. So the library and the City of Bloomington's Family Resources Department worked together with several partners to create these wisdom circles throughout the community. The concept of wisdom circles originates with Native American peoples who practiced oral traditions in communal gatherings. Elders held a vital role in these gatherings as they imparted their wisdom about the past, present, and future through dialogue and passing on the knowledge that they received from their forebears. So inspired by this tradition, our wisdom circles were organized to highlight individuals vital to the Black American struggle for freedom and equality in our community. So we wanted to give people access one-on-one with folks that were invested in these topics. So the largest of these wisdom circles was called A Friend of Martin Luther King Jr. 325 7th and 8th graders at our local middle school and 56 graders at one of our local elementary schools in small groups of 20 to 30 participated in wisdom circles with Reverend Joe Emerson, pictured here, a local Methodist minister who attended Boston University with Martin Luther King Jr., and he was one of the clergy who answered the call to march in Selma. Students received, read, and discussed copies of March Book 1 and March Book 2 with their classes, thanks to a donation from the City of Bloomington's Martin Luther King Jr. Commission. And our evaluation surveys revealed that students were most impressed by learning about the civil rights movement from someone who experienced it firsthand and who was a friend of Martin Luther King Jr. Another wisdom circle we held was titled Black Education. Congressman Lewis has long been an advocate of public education, so this wisdom circle was organized for those wanting to understand the challenges and celebrate the possibilities of Black youth in our current education system. We had Diane Hanks, a retired school administrator with many years of experience working at the school and district level. We had the Vice Chancellor of the Indiana University-Purdue University Partnership Family, School, and Neighborhood Engagement Program, who provided a wealth of information on Black education and what is happening at the national level. The assistant principal at one of our local high schools was also there, and a local school counselor. And so this was unlike the Friend of Martin Luther King Jr., which was held with actual students at the schools and was very, very organized. This Wisdom Circle was open to the public for adults who wanted to come and discuss this topic with sort of the experts in the field with firsthand knowledge. Another Wisdom Circle we did was Social Justice and Community Activism, Fighting the Good Fight. This Wisdom Circle was a discussion on student activism and social justice. Elders in this circle included a former president of the Black Student Union at IU University from 1970 to 1971. Janet Cheatham Bell is a publishing consultant, speaker, and pioneer in publishing Black quotation collections and author of many books, including her own memoir, The Time and Place That Gave Me Life. And we had a local storyteller, actress, and writer. And this was really good. This really drew a crowd of older folks in our community that had been part of the civil rights movement themselves, but also younger people, especially through our partnership with the university, that were activists themselves or getting into activism, that wanted to hear from people that had participated and been around during that era. And pictured here, I should mention, the city of Bloomington was our main partner with the Wisdom Circles, and this was a very large display they did in City Hall. And in the lower part are the flyers from all the Wisdom Circle events that they worked with us to plan. And I'll mention the other two Wisdom Circles we did was Mothers of Black Children. This Wisdom Circle was an opportunity for mothers of Black children to create a support system and hear a variety of perspectives from other mothers in the community. And finally, the Thriving Connection Elders Conversation is an ongoing Wisdom Circle in our community that works in the rural parts of our county, and where people are invited to share their thoughts, insights, experience, and reflections on a different topic. And so they did theirs, Before the Power of Words, on John Lewis and the Civil Rights Movement. And they really draw a crowd with a wide variety of ages, political beliefs, and religious viewpoints. So that was really interesting, and the organization that put that on's goal is to eradicate poverty at the individual and structural level, so they also do a lot of support for food service and job placement and other things. So that was a great partner, and that was a really unique opportunity in Wisdom Circle, and a way to reach people that aren't part of the sort of Bloomington culture, which is, with the university here, can lean very liberal. So that was a great way for them to reach a lot of different people and different belief systems. So after this month-long of programs and book discussions and Wisdom Circles, finally on September 21st, John Lewis, Andrew Aydin, and Nate Powell touched down in Indiana to greet over 1,600 people at IU Auditorium, one of the premier cultural centers of the Midwest. The authors gave an incredibly moving talk about Lewis's lifelong struggle and the importance of discussing our past, fighting for civil rights, and voting. The authors left the stage to a long-standing ovation of awe-inspired crowd. Pictured here is John Lewis with his co-authors in the background speaking from the stage. And to the right, you can see the long, long line of people that were waiting outside to get into the event. Definitely our largest crowd ever for an author talk, needless to say. Here's a few more pictures from the evening. Some sort of comments from attendees I'd like to share. One was, quote, "I will first and foremost use what I've learned in my heart and then by action if ever necessary. Although I've never been violent and I abhor violence, I will more intentionally commit to nonviolence." Someone that was just very inspired by John Lewis's talk of nonviolence and the use of that in the struggle. The interesting thing with partnering with the students is there was an outpouring of Facebook comments and tweets from students after the event. So one student on her Facebook page the next morning said, Last night, Congressman Lewis and his staff sent what I perceive to be a very important message to our generation and the ones behind us. We have grown up in an era where we have been conditioned to believe that government doesn't work. He is living proof that it does. You have got to vote. You have got to take an interest in politics and the things that matter to you. If not for yourself, then for your children and your friends. We need a generation of people willing to stand up, a generation of activists like we saw in the 60s. If we are going to lay that burden down on our children, we have to set them up by putting the right people in office. Vote. It matters. Which is a great segue to the final piece of the puzzle here, ACT. And a big part of that happened on that very night. So we've worked with our local League of Women Voters group on a project called Be a Voter. For several years, the Monroe County Chapter of the League of Women Voters had utilized the library as a high-traffic place to set up a table to assist people with registering to vote, checking their registration status, and identifying their local polling place. And while useful, the League and the library knew more people could be reached and more could be done to promote citizenship. So with our newly adopted service model emphasizing community engagement, the library entered into a formal partnership with the League of Women Voters to provide more than just a table at the library. We worked with them directly to establish our Be a Voter project and a web portal for comprehensive voting information, hosting programs on civic engagement, and working with the League to broaden their community impact. And Congressman Lewis's visit coincided perfectly with our new partnership. As Power of Words attendees entered the IU auditorium that evening, they were met with a large display, pictured here on the left, and table staffed by the League, encouraging them to learn more about civic engagement and register to vote. And soon the League found themselves facing a long line of young people, inspired by John Lewis's story, looking to register to vote for the first time. But our community we're not the only ones moved to action by Be a Voter in this voter registration table that night. John Lewis himself moved that we prioritize voter registration at his event, informed us afterwards that he would require a voter registration table at all his speaking engagements for the March graphic novel going forward. So that was really great for us and really inspiring. In addition to that, on the ACT page, we had information about local organizations and city commissions related to the topics and themes in the book, and lots of ways for further reading, further viewing, and other things, which was really terrific. So I'd like now to just finish with a quick review of our outcomes and evaluations, and then we can get to your questions, which I have seen popping up as I've gone along. First, here's a chart looking at some of the outcomes that we measured. So we asked people that came to any of our programs, did book discussions, or came to the IU auditorium for the final event. As a result of participating in this event, the first one was, I am more aware of the graphic novel format. You can see 77% of people strongly agreed or agreed. A few neutrals there. I'm sure we attracted a lot of fans of graphic novels already. I learned something new about the civil rights movement. 50% strongly agreed, another 30% agreed, so a little over 80% agreed that they learned something new about the civil rights movement. And finally, I am more committed to assuring civil rights in our community, which again had, in fact, more than the other two, the most amount of people agreeing or strongly agreeing. So a lot of people really moved and left feeling committed to working on these issues in our local community. We also did general evaluations of how many people read March Book 1. About 50% of people had read it before coming to a program or the event, and another nearly 40% were then planning to read it. And overall, were you satisfied with the event? And 98% of everyone agreed or strongly agreed. So you can't please everyone, but that's a pretty good percentage. And finally, a great outcome of this was winning the ALA Excellence in Library Programming Award. I'll repeat again, you're welcome to download our award application, which Features a lot of what you've seen here. And also includes our letters of support we had to get from community partners, and a lot of examples of our marketing materials. So now I'll pass it on to Samantha.
Great. Thanks for the awesome presentation, Michael. Before we move on to the Q&A portion, I want to take a quick moment to tell everyone about the ALA Excellence in Library Programming Award, sponsored by ALA's Cultural Communities Fund and presented every year during ALA's annual conference. The award recognizes a library that demonstrates excellence in programming by creating a cultural program or program series. Right now, applications for 2018 are open and being accepted until February 1st, 2018. To learn more or to apply, you can click on the link in the PowerPoint. With that, I'm going to move on to our questions, which we have quite a few already. One of them that came up is, can you repeat a bit about your point about transportation you provided?
Yeah, so we worked with the South Central Community Action Program. They provided the funding to rent, I believe they rented local school buses for the evening, and then we advertised in local communities on sort of the opposite side of town. They had two meeting points. I believe one was a parking lot at a local Kmart, and one was at a church, where people could come and they park their cars in those large parking lots, and then we're bused the about 10-15 minute drive across town directly to the door of IU Auditorium, and we're able to get a bus back. So we worked very closely with them to provide them marketing materials and ways to advertise there in the local community, as well as listing in our local papers that option, that free transportation option, was available.
Great. Thank you. So our next question is, how many copies of each volume did you purchase?
Sure. So for checkout in the library, we purchased 40. I think we ended up with 40 to 45 copies of each book for checkout. As far as the large purchase of books to give away, which we worked with partners to fund, we ended up purchasing 1,000 copies between both books. So some of that the city of Bloomington paid for the Wisdom Circle, which we distributed nearly 400 copies through. And then we used Friends of the Library raised funds to give copies away for local book discussions, and some copies for, like I said, like our teen book discussion here at the library. And then Indiana University purchased some of those copies to give to some of their classrooms, and their union board, as part of their sort of marketing the book, had a few giveaways that they did, tabling events, which was, while costly, a great way to get people invested and interested in the topic.
Great. So I believe you covered in the discussions both March Book 1 and 2. Did you face any confusion about what would be covered during the book discussions due to the multiple books you were covering?
No, I would say we generally focused on March Book 1 and getting people sort of at least to have read the first one. But it turned out a lot of people read both, and John Lewis's, of course, Book 3 had not been out by the time our event happened, but he discusses his whole life story at the author talk. Does that answer that?
Yeah, I think so. So there is a question about how you could apply this concept on a smaller scale for either a rural library or a school library.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be choosing the right program or programs. I think we found that to be a great way to get people invested up front before the program, to find sort of their personal connection to it, and to have a way to dive in the material. There's so many themes to explore here. Of course, the civil rights themes and John Lewis's story, but we had a lot of fun just introducing a lot of people to the graphic novel format, which was another interesting way to get people that maybe see this as a very political thing as opposed to a personal story thing and part of America's history. So that was a great way to get some people that are like, well, I'm just very interested in the artwork and the format. I think the wisdom circles, which I believe I'll be working with ALA Programming Librarian to provide a description up on their website. If you have local people in your community that have firsthand experience, as we found from ages young and old, that spoke the most. To hear someone, always to hear from someone that lived through it, it really makes a tremendous, tremendous impact. And we relied, as far as money and maybe getting some copies of the book. The publisher worked with us very closely to give us a great price, the best price they could, and it proved to be a great fundraising sort of model. It wasn't just support the library, but our friends group was able to really go to specific funders and organizations and say, would you buy 50 copies of this book for this amount of money that we are going to give to children for free? And so that was, we got a lot of yeses to that proposal. But I should say, we did get a no on that. We did apply for a large grant with a local granting organization. They had a meeting with us. They left excited. They wanted to have their name on this. And then someone high up in the organization discovered that the N-word was used in John Lewis's book and said they would not provide a penny for it, despite the context in which it is used is obviously historic and an important part of the story. But so, the topic mattered in our conversations from the community to the funders.
Great. So another question is that from someone who has a lot of experience doing NEA's big read, and they don't have an issue with people giving away the free books, but they have a problem with people coming back and joining in the discussion. Do you have any tips for how to get more people back into the library to join the discussion after giving away the books?
Well, interesting. We just received for this year an NEA Big Read grant, so we are having to deal with that conundrum yet again. I wouldn't say I have a solid, or anyone necessarily has a solid answer. One thing we're doing, which we did with every copy of the March books, and that we're doing with our NEA Big Read book this year, is we've purchased large stickers or book plates that we put in the cover of the book that has all our information, has information on how to organize a book discussion, where to go to register your book discussion. So we have that there in hopes that every time they open the book cover, it's a constant reminder of who they got the book from and what the purpose of getting that book from us was for. And then, of course, we are just constantly marketing and trying to get things in the local paper and on social media that's always talking about the book discussion and inviting people to interact with us and remind them that these free copies have been made available and what resources and what we can provide to support it. But really, putting the book plate in the book is at least leaves us feeling confident that they won't forget where they got the book from or how to get back to us to join in those conversations and discussions.
Great. So this is a pretty giant project. Do you have information about how many staff members and hours are dedicated each year to this?
I do not have that on hand, and so I would invite anyone or whoever wanted to know that to email me if you really want specifics. But generally, for this one, we had myself, who I'll admit, with Nate Powell being my best friend, and civil rights, very important issue to me, I poured in uncountable weekends and hours into supporting this myself. But we did have 2 librarians and a manager assigned to it, and each program, of course, took 1 hour to do the program and probably 3 hours of a minimum of planning and getting things together ahead of time. But unfortunately, I do not have right in front of me. We do keep track of those, so I would be able to provide that specific answer. But generally, direct involvement was a couple librarians, and a manager sort of full-time on the project, and then several other librarians that did one-off programs. But with this one, we really, our community partners each sent, we had weekly meetings with a person from all those organizations listed earlier that would come to every single meeting and would do a lot of work. So we really spread the work on this one around, which was great.
Great. So I'm going to combine these two questions a bit. So did you receive any complaints from John Lewis about John Lewis since he was a political figure, or with today's heated political environment, would this subject, do you think, still be a good choice for an event like this, or and do you have any advice for how to handle a potentially hot topic?
So we did not actually receive any. I think we got a couple comments that were like, "Why are you choosing? Why are you bringing a politician?" But I have to say, we did this program in September 2015, so the environment was a little different than it may feel now, at least as far as that. We really did focus on all our marketing and discussion on John Lewis's history and his status as a civil rights legend, and not sort of on his active voting and being a member of Congress. We didn't really pursue the path of exploring what is Congress, what do congressmen do. We just didn't sort of touch that element of it. That isn't part of the March books. That isn't what John Lewis is interested in discussing or talking about when he comes. In fact, he has to plan all these events separate from his congressional schedule with a different staff. So really, when you work with him and his people, they are different. He isn't interested in coming to discuss that, so there really isn't any pressure as the organizer to do that. So I would say it's probably more important than ever to be discussing, in my personal opinion, these topics and things. And I think there is a way to have it, you're going to have, for it to introduce conversation and be a conversation starter. I think depending on your community, it really could be an extremely hot button issue. But I think if you could do your best to focus on that history and it being our history, America's history, and that story, as opposed to sort of his record as a congressman, would be your best path forward.
Great. Could you talk a little bit about how you collected your feedback?
Sure, yeah. So for all the programs before the IU Auditorium event, we sort of didn't demand, but we highly encourage people before they left the room for those programs or those wisdom circles to fill out our evaluations. I believe there may be copies or information about what those evaluations look like in the award application, but if not, you could contact me. I'd be happy to share what those forms look like. And so those were the easiest to get the feedback from. With our book discussion kits, for example, we included evaluations for everyone that participated in those book clubs. And then for the large IU Auditorium event with 1,600 people, we had a printed program that everyone received. And so it mentioned in 2 different spots on the program that a simple URL for people to go to fill out a survey after they attended the event. We had a projection screen before and after John Lewis's event that also encouraged people to fill out the survey. And we had collected email addresses all along for our newsletter and stuff. And so a day and a week after the event, I sent an email to everyone that had given us an email address encouraging them to fill out the survey. And we had many hundreds of people after that event take the time to go to the website and fill out the survey. The key is to make the survey not a lot of questions and simple, and to reinforce that in your ask. Please fill out our brief survey. Please answer our 2 simple questions. That way people know they're not clicking a link that's going to take 10 minutes of their time if it's only going to really take a minute.
Great. Well, unfortunately, it looks like we're out of time. I know that there are a few questions that we didn't have time to get to. If you would like, you can send them to us and we'll route them to Michael. Our email is publiclibrarian@ala.org. I would like to give a huge thank you to Michael for this presentation and, of course, to all of you for joining us today. This webinar will be available for viewing on programminglibrarian.org within a couple of hours. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.